Hello, friends. Welcome to Mike Inspires Me, the show about wellness. Amazing people and information to inspire you to take charge of your life and your health.
All right. Tonight, we have our first interview. We have a guest on our show who is very special to me, and I thought I would start with her because she has a perspective that isn't often shared when you read about folks who go through health transformations, and you hear about all the wonderful things when, I lost all this weight, my life is fantastic, yada, 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 right? Well, one of the things that people often kind of skip over is the other side of the coin. So tonight I introduce to you Teresa, aka Terry, the woman behind the man. You want to say hello, Terry?
Hello, everyone.
All right. So, Terry, we talked a little bit beforehand. I didn't stage this with you, but I did want to give you an overall gist of what we'd be talking about so you had in your mind a comfort level. A lot of this journey has been very emotional, not just for me, but for you as well. When I first met you, I was heavy, and then through the years I put on more weight to the point where there was a lot of emotional stress. Agree?
I do agree.
And to the point where I've talked about this openly, where I struggled even with talking about thoughts of suicide and those type of things. I can imagine that had to be challenging for you.
It definitely was.
How do you, when you think back to those times, how did you deal with that kind of stress? With the stress of, wow, my husband is unhappy, he's unhealthy. Can you remember, how did it make you feel?
I was always worried. Is he going to have a heart attack? Is he going to be suicidal?
Yeah, and that's not something that anybody wants to have to deal with, especially when you care about somebody. It's one of those things where, and I know we've talked about this, you felt torn at times. You wanted to speak to my mother and other family members because you just at times felt helpless.
I couldn't speak to anyone.
Right, because you felt maybe that you would betray me by opening up about it.
Definitely.
Yeah. We've talked about this at great length, you and I, and reason we're opening up about it today is I know there are other people out there who have had similar situations, and I think as a couple we feel that in order for us even to grow is to be open about it with people so that they understand some of the things we went through. Now, I want to preface this whole thing. This has been a godsend for you and me, the transformation, has it not?
Yes, it has.
It's changed both of our lives.
Yes, it has.
But it hasn't come without its stresses, even right through this day.
I agree.
But the trade-off, what we were just describing earlier, is outweighed much more by the benefits now. Right?
Yes,
but
it has.
My health, my happiness, even though, which we'll get into in a few minutes, I still drive you nuts.
Oh, yes.
And I know I do, because I'm driving myself nuts some days. And that's the stuff I share about with my friends. Well, let's delve a little further. And, I don't want to dig up too much, but I do want to be able to reach. You and I were talking before we started recording, and I asked you a question about, well, what if you knew somebody or you had a friend who was in a similar situation with a husband or a wife or somebody who was struggling, and how you would handle it. And it sounded like, you didn't feel you would want to give advice too much because you're not a healthcare professional or a mental health professional.
That is correct. And I don't want to give a person the wrong information, and then I'm liable.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you'd feel badly. Well, that had to also put you in a tough spot with me.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what you struggled with when, I would say that, I'd go to bed saying, I wish I have a heart attack in my sleep. That's heavy. Pun intended. That's heavy.
Yes, it is.
Because, and looking back, and folks, and I say this too because you think, well, how horrible, Mike, that you said these things, but that was my reality at the time. And I feel, I've apologized to Terry many, many times for having been that way, but it was obviously, I was a sad and sick person at the time feeling that way. And if anything, I think Terry, you're probably less hurt, but just you feel sad for that person.
Very sad.
Yeah. And the great news is, as I keep flipping back, is that's behind me. And that's part of why we want to share this with people. One, the biggest thing, okay, and that's the goal of what I'm doing, Mike Inspires Me, is to give people some hope. And that's why we're opening up our lives and our story, mine and Terry's, through this transformation. All right. Well, I don't know how much we want to delve into the past, but I mean, we could talk about all kinds of aspects of it. I think the bigger piece, and some of the past stuff is probably obvious. I think there are folks out there who are already dealing with this, with a loved one who is killing themselves, with drugs, alcohol, food, whatever it is, and they're struggling. I get approached all the time with questions on how to deal with that, all the time. And it's not easy to deal with. But the more interesting part of the story, and that's where I think this podcast is going to be kind of a eye-opener for folks, is the struggles during my transformation, which may not be all that much of a surprise to people, and then the ones after. Now, for folks who follow me, I don't think you're going to be that surprised, right? Because you well know that I'm open about my binge eating, my ups and downs, and for the most part, I will be completely honest, I am happier than I've ever been. Life is not perfect. But I do want to open up because I don't want to sell somebody a bill of goods to say, well, every day is great afterwards. And it's not. But if you add it all up, I couldn't quantify it, but I would rather be here with all my struggles than be where I was before mentally and health-wise. All right. So I decided to transform. Now, this is going to be tough for you, and I'm going to have to try to put a time period for you. So in 2014, I decided I was going to do this. And at that time, I don't even know how much either of us knew what was going to happen. And I don't even know how much you were even aware, other than I said, oh, I'm tracking my food and stuff, right? So about that time period, and I remember this, we went on that anniversary to the and there's pictures of this in 2014 at the place in Mystic, I forgot the name of the bed and breakfast.
It's like 1839
or something like that, the House of 1812 or something.
Yes.
Okay, shout out to those guys, they're fantastic, by the way. Can't remember the name, but it was a great place. We haven't been there in a while. So I look at pictures of myself. And so our anniversary is in August. I started in June. So July, August. So it's 2 months in. Okay. And I had already started. In fact, I remember sitting and eating the breakfast and entering the food. Because I remember when we sat outside we ate the outdoor breakfast that one morning. He cooked it up outside for us and we sat in the garden out there.
It was beautiful.
Oh, it was fantastic. And the thing that I remember was and I had already been 2 months in, I was putting the food into my tracking app at the time. Do you remember anything, how we felt back then? You probably, even then, didn't realize what was going to happen, did you?
Definitely not, especially in the early stages.
I hadn't changed much physically.
No.
Do you remember it all? There's a picture of me standing at the top of the stairs, I think, coming down.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, I was still big.
He was still big, I remember.
Yeah. Yep. Now we're going to go and flash a little forward, and I started changing a little bit. So at that point, I hadn't really changed what I was eating too much. I was just more in the tracking phase.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to starting to modify a little bit, like cutting back or changing some of the foods. Remember I used to keep a tote in the bedroom full of like snacks?
Snacks, yes. And did you have your snacks?
Remember I used to get mad because I would binge eat them sometimes and then hate myself.
Yes, afterwards. Like, what did I do with all that hard work I've done?
Right, and what's changed, because I still... Oh, FML. But, so I remember those. I don't keep that tote anymore. Now I got the little small snack cabinet downstairs with my little protein bars and whatnot. Yeah. So you remember that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm describing that time period, is trying to describe feelings. So at that point, now you see I was consistently tracking, because that whole time period for almost over a year, so even beyond when I lost the 205 pounds, I continued to track almost nonstop. Because do you remember one thing? Because you see, I haven't done it in a while, although once in a while I start tracking again, but I haven't been doing it. I'd be like, hang on, or I'd be bugging you. You'd cook something and be like, what's in it?
What's in it?
How did it make you feel when I would bug you about what was in it? What's it? Did you put any butter in it?
Well, you have every reason to know exactly what I put in there.
But I would explain to you part of the reason I was doing it is because I needed to enter it into that stinking app to know how many calories.
Yes.
But I think you're the type of person, if you want to put a little butter in the pan to fry up the eggs or put a little cheese in the eggs, you don't really think about it.
Sure don't. It just comes natural.
But did it drive you crazy when I would you felt interrogated? I tried not to.
I was like, here we go again.
Well, like why? Why do you say that?
Because that's usually what you usually will say. What did you put in those eggs? I need to know so I can track it.
I feel like a crazy Nazi for that. But it was part of my success in what I've been able to do, because I had to think about what I was putting in my mouth. So you get that, right?
Yes, I get it now.
Because remember I've told you, a pat of butter's got, I forgot how many calories, but there's a lot of calories even in a pat of butter. And part of it was not so much micromanaging everything, but just paying attention to it. But you weren't on a diet, and you never really have been.
That's so true.
So, segue here, guys. One of the things I wrote about, I think a couple of years ago, I wrote an article called The Unequal Yoke. Okay, and that's Y-O-K-E. And for those of you who don't know what a yoke is, if you've seen animals that pull plows or let's just say a plow, and if one of the animals is stronger than the other, that's called unequally yoked. Because in order for them to pull and pull straight, they need to be equally yoked. You'll hear about this in religion. When you've got one person who's more religious than the other, they kind of drag the other person back and yada, yada, yada. Well, the same thing with eating. Okay, if you've got one person who's trying to be more conscious, and you have one person who, frankly, and you guys who follow me, you've seen Terry doesn't really need to, at least physically, you can look at her and say, oh, well, she's in good shape. She doesn't really need to. Although I do tell her that you can still be normal health looking, but, you got to eat healthy overall. This woman didn't sign up for this, okay? And sometimes I have to step back and remember that, because she did sign up with the Big Mike when she met me. Now, I can't remember. I might have been close to 300 pounds at that time. I can't remember, or maybe a little more. But, so she knew somewhat of what she was getting into. She didn't know it was going to get worse, and she didn't know that I was going to completely flip the script and become a health nut. She's happy that I did.
Oh, yeah.
Saved my life. But some of this life is tough.
It is, and it's not easy.
Now tonight, Terry and I ate dinner together. Okay, we ate the same thing. And I'm in less of a tracking mode right now. And I think that's when I know Terry breathes a sigh of relief when she sees me start eating with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does it make you feel? So you don't really get offended when I don't necessarily eat what you're having. Like, you've had times literally you'll make something, you'll offer it to me, and I say no. Did that ever offend you, or how did it make you, or did you kind of say to yourself, well, I know he's being health conscious, so I'm not going to care?
Like you just mentioned, health conscious and didn't care.
It didn't bother you?
No.
Right, so it didn't it's like, oh, he doesn't want to eat my food, or...
No, not at all.
All right, so we're kind of... By the way, guys, for those of you who know us personally, we're both bit ADD too, so we're... And it's late in the afternoon, early evening, and so we're doing this because we felt a little inspired, but we also wanted to kind of get it out there. But we tend to meander all over the place. So I hope hearing some of this stuff is helpful. All right, I'm kind of going back. Let's talk about the journey. Now, this is the interesting part, the ups and the downs. Let's talk about one of my favorite stories, and I think it's become legendary when we talk about all the walking and the hiking and the mountains. So now we're going to do another flashback, and I like these because this is what's going to become the movie someday, right? My life is a movie. Who do you want to play you, by the way? I'll play myself. There were many days I would come home from work and head straight out the door to go take a walk. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't do anymore. I take my walk, during lunch, and I have my one workout, and then I do my weekend now. But back then I was obsessed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now there was you were the one initially that got me started walking.
That is correct.
Which you later regretted. Is that right?
Not really.
Really? Now we're going to remind you. So let's talk about a time we walked around town, and we walked way over by the rail trail on the other side of town and we just kept walking, and you kept saying, is this ever going to be over?
Yes, it seemed like it never ended.
But what I think a lot of people don't know is you initially the one. So back in the early days, when I first started my journey, I was just doing my Galad online workouts that I had off Amazon Prime. I was doing those. But eventually you started walking, which you still do from time to time, and then got me to come out with you, which I initially didn't like. I did not like which is ironic because I'm Hike with Mike. I walk in the woods all the time, and I walk every day. So I do credit you, Terry, and I do, and I mention it often because we laugh about this, because now it went from Terry being the one that initiated it to me becoming this nutcase. Now is it coming back a little bit? Do you remember? Okay, there were times we would take a walk and we would head down up the hill here and then across the street from us. I'm pointing. You guys can't see. And we'd head up down the path that heads towards MCC, and then we would head up and head downtown and take a loop back. I mean, it was a long loop.
Yes, it was. So we're saying like going down Main Street to Center Street back onto Middle Turnpike.
Right. Didn't we stop for breakfast one time?
Yes, we did.
All right. But eventually I started getting too obsessed about it, didn't I? Your tolerance would be like, all right, Mike, I can handle 4 or 5 miles, but this is...
And that was it.
And I'd be getting up 7, 8 miles, and you were like, come on. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
Yeah. What were you thinking, though, back then, as far as me? Can you remember? I mean, it was changing. I mean, you saw me changing. Now I was going from a guy who, you remember, at one point, you'd ask me to go walking, and I'm like, to now, I was the one not only walking, but dragging you.
Dragging, exactly. Because I'm like, oh my goodness, I'll be doing 7, 8 miles. I feel like my heart is going to stop.
Oh my gosh. I remember that. And that's part of the reason why I think when I started hiking too, initially it wasn't bad. And you did hike with me. You came with me on some of them. I remember we hiked over at the reservoir here. We've done this a few times through the years. And Terry will hike with me. You guys will see her out, especially in the spring. Remember the turtle we came across? She was burying eggs in the ground when we were over there. Yeah. So, you and I have had some fun times, or we see the deer out there and we hike and stuff.
Or the coyotes.
Well, you haven't seen those. I have. When did you see a coyote? Maybe you imagined it. All right. Well, let's not get too off into some of these things. What the purpose of this really is just to highlight to folks some of the good stuff, obviously, because let's face it, the majority of this has been a good thing for both of us. But I also want to just illustrate that this transformation obviously affected Terry, and my family, of course, the rest of my family. But Terry, being one of the closest people to me, had to live with all of these extremely, and it just reminded me something, extremely big changes. Okay. Here's one I want to talk about. So, remember when you used to pick me up outside the Gold Building, and I was starting to physically change? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that.
This is very interesting, especially the time I'm waiting inside the Jeep, and I'm waiting for you. And as you started to transition, losing your weight, and it was a guy that came out, and I thought it was you. And I'm like, oh my God, that's not even my husband. Because I was so used to your
size, right?
Your size, and then when you started losing weight, it's like, oh my goodness. I felt like really like embarrassed because it's like, oh my God, my husband has changed. He's not the same person like he used to be.
So it took your mind time to catch up with, because even though you were living with me every day, sometimes you forget.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Every time I see another black woman, I think it's you. So don't
Oh my God.
Because we all look alike, right? Yeah. So, okay, so that's an interesting, and we've talked about that a few times, where, you'd be waiting for me and you'd see somebody, and then your mind hadn't quite caught up yet with where I already was going. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So here's a thing I have not asked you in a while. How is it now? You're used to...
I'm used to it now.
You're used to it now. So it's not like I walk up and I surprise you.
Yeah, because again, it's like I'm used to how things are now.
So good lead-in. So tonight I showed you the podcast I did last night, okay? And I showed you a picture which had me before. And maybe I should bring it up too. I had me before, and you kept staring at it. And I was trying to... So this is a great thing for you to... So guys, for those of you who heard my podcast number 4, Dream It to Change It. And I put a picture of myself when I was probably about 400 something pounds there. And above to the left side, if you're facing it, is a picture of me now, just a couple weeks ago. And I'm dreaming of that person. And it's part of... You guys can listen to that one later. That's, if you haven't already, you should be, because guys, it's a fantastic podcast. But this one here, Terry, I'm going to step back. What stopped you? Why did you stop when you looked at it? I want you to tell me what. And don't be afraid to say anything you want, but what was it? Because it made me.
Well, looking at the picture reminds me how many years I had seen of you, and then seeing it's like, wow, it's like 2 different people that I actually see. It's before and after.
What do you see here?
When I see your facial expression, I see sadness in the eyes. That's what I actually see. You just look sad.
What a contrast to this picture, right?
Definitely. I see that you're alive. You live in your life. You look very happy. You don't look down and out.
Right. It's amazing because even myself, sometimes I have a hard time even looking at these old pictures because I feel separated from it. It's a weird identity thing. And it's got to be strange for you too, because you have been living with this man. We've been together over 16 years, and I literally am half the size I was.
Honestly, I feel as still with the transition feels as I have 2 husbands, even though it's one person, that I've been with. And it was really a challenge with a person for many years with a size, over 400. It was stressful, ups and downs.
Maybe that's a good kind of segue into another thing. And we've talked about this. And this is, and guys, I'm going to go down this route because I think it's important for people to understand. And I apologize to anybody who has struggles like I did then, but we're going to talk about some things that were challenging. And I'm going to talk about some things and see what it triggers in Terry. So, I am well aware that it was hard when we would go to restaurants, because what did we do every time when I was big and they offered us a booth? What happened?
We always mentioned that, can we actually have another chair?
Or a table. Yeah, usually a table. And the reason is, guys, because I couldn't fit in a booth. My stomach girth was so big that most booths I literally could not fit in. And it's weird because even to this day, I'll sit in a booth and I'm surprised how much room I've got in front of me now. I'm going to ask you something, and I know you're probably just going to give me the answer I want to hear, but were you ever embarrassed? Or for me? Or
honestly, I was embarrassed for you because I noticed, like, observing other people and how they will look. I look on our facial expressions, and they didn't have to imply it, but I can tell the way they're looking is like, and look at that person, like he's so fat.
Okay, so you felt that.
Yes, I did, and I felt very bad for that. It was hurting.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk about and be open with people. Personality-wise, basically the same, but what would you say is different now about me?
Confident. Very sociable.
Yeah.
You live in your life.
And it shouldn't be a surprise, right? Because I think when you feel better about yourself, you feel confident.
Yes, you sure do.
And when you're not ashamed of yourself, you're more sociable.
That's correct.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the ugly. Temper flares.
Oh, yeah.
Outbursts. Yeah. Anything you want to say on it, or you don't have to worry. I mean, so we're not talking about domestic violence per se, although I was a yeller and I was not always in control of my temper. Terry will tell you, I mean, you could tell him, I'm not really a hitter, but
definitely not.
But I was an intimidator.
Intimidator, yes.
Yelling, had very bad. And a lot of that's, I mean, I was just commenting on the other day. I was like, I don't remember the last time. I mean, I get frustrated about stuff, but
what couples that don't have
right.
disagreements?
But I don't remember the last time even acting.
It has been a while.
Yeah, and it's not to say it didn't happen afterwards, because I think if you've got emotional challenges, you always do. I mean, we both have our challenges, trust me.
Mm-hmm.
But because I feel better, these things really don't happen.
That's true.
It's kind of interesting. Guys, as we're looking at these pictures, we're trying to, it's eliciting sort of emotions and kind of things. All right. Anything else you wanted to say on this, Mama?
I don't know, looking at the picture as before when you're 400-something pounds, this looks like you just didn't want to be here. It seems like you just want to, like, die.
Well, you're also speaking from things I said, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's shift gears. There's a couple things I want to do, because obviously there's a positive message in all this, and we've delved through some of the struggles in it. The the what's in this food Nazi, the rigidness with, schedules and things, which I've loosened up through the years as I've learned to be more comfortable with myself. So let's talk about a lot of the things that have changed that you're enjoying now. So what is it, and you love me and I love you, we can talk about these things. What is it you love now? What is it that makes you happy?
Seeing the fact that you're happy and you're alive.
And when you mean alive too, can you clarify for our audience what you mean? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see also too, it's like you have lots of new friends, you into the metal world, you're very sociable. You weren't doing all those things back then. You didn't have many friends, you weren't going out.
So what you mean, I know I have more friends than I can have. I love all you guys, by the way. Thank you so much for being a part of my life. This is so exciting. But I think what you mean by being alive is you mean
you're living,
having a right, yes. Having a life.
Yes.
We're not talking about being alive or dead. We're talking about thriving.
Yes.
And you see it.
Definitely.
This whole thing's changed both of our lives in ways we never expected, I think. Right? I mean, when I first embarked on the journey, and I didn't know where I was going, and then when I started to notice that not only was I having success with being able to take charge of my health and my life, but it was having an impact on other people.
Friends, family.
Right, but people coming to me and saying, well, wow, your story, the things you're talking about, are helping me change my life and inspiring me.
Yes. And how many people have came to you?
Or you.
Yes.
How many of your coworkers or friends have come to you and told you things?
Mm-hmm. Many.
It's a life that's like a dream sometimes, right? I mean, sometimes do you ever feel like you got to pinch yourself? It's like
is this for real?
Right. I mentioned that in one of my podcasts the other day. When I look, I have to kind of take a step back and say, I can't believe it's like they say, living the dream.
Mm-hmm.
But how did I get this, though, Terry? It wasn't handed to me, was it?
Definitely not. And definitely wasn't surgery. You bust your ass off from the beginning. I remember even times when there was, lots of snow. It did not stop you. No matter what, you were still determined to lose that weight.
I mean, getting outside and
yes,
walking through the snow.
Walking through the snow, didn't matter.
I still do that, right?
Yeah.
I did it today.
It doesn't matter if it's raining. It doesn't matter to you how the climate is. You're like a laser. It's not stopping you. And there's no excuses whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're both getting a little tired, and this has been a good interview. Guys, we'll probably do more of these type of things going forward, but I wanted to introduce Teresa, aka Terry, as my partner in the Mike Inspires Me journey that we're on together. You will see her from time to time. She is the woman behind the man, and she is my business consult. Often I'm asking her questions and her opinions all the time, driving her crazy. Terry, when I start getting preaching at 6:30 in the morning, right, when I'm get on fire about some health thing or whatever else, right, you're always there. She listens to my speeches. She reviews a lot of things for me. So she's my best friend and just a heck of a nice person. And I hope, as you guys get to meet me, you'll meet her too, as maybe we'll be traveling to a city near you.
So, that's right.
All right. Was there anything else you want to say for folks? We'll have plenty of time in the future, but any parting words on any of this? Any encouragement or?
Everyone stay awesome.
That's great. Wow, you did it for me, so I don't even have to do it. Guys, thanks for tuning in. And Terry said it.